When I first stepped into the old Victorian house at the end of Alderwood Lane, I thought I'd found the perfect fresh start. I'd been craving a reset, a chance to put my past behind me and move forward. A recent divorce had left me feeling raw and untethered, and with no family left, I'd found myself strangely adrift. So, when the realtor showed me this house, with its sprawling wraparound porch, intricate moldings, and dark wood paneling, I felt an odd instant connection. It was run down, sure, and the price was suspiciously low, but I didn't question it. I needed a new chapter, and this house felt like it was waiting for me. But as I moved through its dim hallways, a strange feeling prickled along my spine. The silence was thick, almost charged, like the house was holding its breath. I tried to shake it off, brushing it aside as nothing more than nerves. It was an old house after all, and old houses had their quirks. Still, I felt watched, as though unseen eyes tracked my every step. That first night, as I lay in bed, I heard it, a faint whisper. It was just a murmur at first, barely audible over the sound of my own breathing. But as I listened, it grew louder, insistent. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was desperate, as if someone was urgently trying to get my attention. I sat up, heart pounding, straining to hear, but the sound faded, leaving me with an unsettling silence. I chuckled nervously, chalking it up to first night jitters. But the next night, the whispers returned, louder this time, closer. Sometimes it was just a soft hum, like a lullaby sung just out of earshot. Other times, it felt like someone was speaking right next to me, their breath cool against my skin. And it wasn't just me who noticed. My dog, Max, was clearly disturbed. He'd stand at the edge of my bed, growling at nothing, his eyes fixed on empty corners. Other times, he'd whimper, retreating under the bed with his tail tucked, his whole body trembling. Despite my unease, I pushed forward, determined to settle in. I spent my days unpacking and fixing up the place, trying to ignore the creeping sense of dread that seemed to settle deeper into my bones with each passing day. But things only got stranger. I started finding objects in places I hadn't left them. My keys on the kitchen floor, my phone in the attic, my hairbrush lying in the middle of the living room. I tried to laugh it off, telling myself I would get just forgetful, maybe a little frazzled from the move. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. One evening, while cleaning out the attic, I stumbled upon a portrait. It was large and heavy, with an ornate frame and thick layers of dust. As I brushed it off, the faces in the painting became clear. A family of 5, dressed in Victorian attire, their expressions stiff and somber. My eyes were immediately drawn to the youngest girl, who stood slightly apart from the others. Her face was oddly vivid, her eyes piercing and intense, almost alive. She couldn't have been older than 10, but her expression held a strange sadness, a sorrow that seemed to reach across the years and settle into my own heart. A chill ran down my spine, and I quickly covered the portrait with an old sheet. But as I turned to leave, I felt a sudden, icy touch on my shoulder. I froze, heart hammering, and spun around. The attic was empty, trembling. I backed away, trying to shake off the cold that seemed to seep into my very bones. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face, the little girl from the portrait, her eyes staring into mine, pleading, desperate. I woke in a sweat, feeling an overwhelming urge to check the mirror. When I walked into the bathroom, my breath caught. Written in the condensation on the mirror was a single word: leave. My stomach dropped, and I stumbled back, my mind racing. I hadn't touched the mirror since that afternoon, and there was no way I could have written that word by accident. I tried to convince myself it was a trick of my imagination, that maybe the fog had just settled oddly. But deep down, I knew better. Over the next few days, the messages grew bolder. Every morning, I'd find new words scrawled across the mirror in that same urgent handwriting. Get out. You're not safe. He's coming. My nerves were frayed, my sleep plagued by nightmares of the girl in the portrait, standing at the foot of my bed, her eyes wide with fear. I started to wonder if I was losing my mind. Was it all in my head, or was something truly sinister at play? Desperate for answers, I visited the town's local historian, Margaret, hoping she could shed some light on the house's past. Over tea, Margaret's eyes gleamed as she told me the story of the Mortons, the family who had once lived in my house. They were a good family, she said, her voice low and conspiratorial, but strange. Theodore Morton, the father, was, well, let's just say he wasn't a kind man. His children were terrified of him, especially his youngest, Annabelle. There were rumors that she had abilities. Abilities? I echoed, a chill settling over me. Margaret nodded gravely. People said she could see things no one else could. Some believed she was trying to protect her family, to warn them of something terrible, but it wasn't enough. The whole family died in a fire, though some say it was no accident. I left Margaret's house feeling sick, a growing sense of dread gnawing at me. If Annabelle really had abilities, then perhaps she was trying to reach out to me now, to warn me of some danger. But if so, what was she afraid of? And who was he? That night, the whispers were louder than ever, filling every corner of the house, pressing in on me from all sides. I lay in bed, paralyzed by fear, listening to the frantic murmurs that seemed to echo from the walls themselves. And then, as I drifted into a restless sleep, I saw him, the dark figure of a man standing at the edge of my vision, his eyes cold and menacing. I woke with a start, only to find that the words had been scratched into my bedroom wall. "He's coming for you." It was no longer just whispers or fleeting shadows. This was a warning, clear and unmistakable. I couldn't stay here, not with whatever was lurking in the darkness. But something inside me resisted. I felt a strange, almost magnetic pull to the house, a compulsion I couldn't understand. Despite my terror, I couldn't leave. Not yet. In a desperate bid for clarity, I went down to the basement, where I'd found some old family belongings stored away in boxes. I rifled through them, hoping for anything that might give me a clue about Annabelle or her family. That's when I found it, a tattered, yellowed photograph, hidden beneath layers of dust. My breath hitched as I looked closer, heart pounding. It was a picture of my mother as a young woman, standing beside Annabelle, her arm wrapped around the girl's shoulder. My mind reeled, the implications crashing over me like a tidal wave. My mother had known the Mortons. She'd been connected to this house long before I ever set foot in it. But why hadn't she ever told me? My hands trembled as I realized the truth. The hauntings weren't random. They weren't just the restless spirits of a family long gone. They were tied to me, to my blood. The warnings weren't for a stranger. They were for someone with a connection to this place, a connection that ran deeper than I could have ever imagined. That night, I decided I couldn't run, not with my family's past tangled up in the horrors of this house. I had to confront the spirit haunting me. I had to face Theodore Morton, armed with my mother's old journals, which I'd found buried in one of the basement boxes. I pieced together scraps of prayers, protective spells, anything that might give me a fighting chance. With Max by my side, I descended into the basement, feeling the weight of dread pressing down on me like a heavy cloak. The air grew colder with each step, thick with the stench of decay. As I reached the bottom of the stairs, a deep guttural growl filled the room, vibrating through the walls. I couldn't see him, but I knew he was there. Theodore, his presence thick and oppressive, filling every inch of the space. I closed my eyes, reciting a chant from my mother's journal, my voice shaking as I begged for protection, for release from the dark shadow that clung to this house. The growling grew louder, more feral, as if he were mocking me, daring me to continue. I fought to keep my voice steady, pouring every ounce of my strength into the words, and then, suddenly, the air shifted. I felt a warmth beside me, a comforting presence that I knew instinctively was Annabelle. Her spirit was there, guiding me, giving me the courage I so desperately needed. With a final desperate plea, I screamed, "You have no power here. Leave this house." The room shook, a violent tremor that rattled my bones. The cold lifted, and the oppressive weight of Theodore's spirit began to fade, replaced by a faint, lingering sorrow. It was over. When I finally opened my eyes, the basement was silent. The shadows had retreated, leaving only a sense of peace, a quiet calm that felt like a balm on my soul. I stumbled back up the stairs, feeling lighter, freer than I had in weeks. The house was no longer filled with whispers and dark presences. It was just a house, a place of peace, at last. In the days that followed, I stayed, feeling a strange sense of kinship with the house. I knew Annabelle was still there, her spirit watching over me, and perhaps even my mother in some way. And though I sometimes heard faint whispers at night, they no longer filled me with fear. Instead, they reminded me that I was not alone, that the past had been laid to rest. The house on Alderwood Lane had finally found peace, and so had I. Thanks so much for watching. I'd love to hear your thoughts about this story, and share your ideas for future videos. See you in the next video.